Welcome back to Special Session, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian Schott, publisher of Utah Political Watch. I've been covering politics in Utah for more than 25 years. We've got a packed show for you. Senator Mike Lee is picking another fight with his own party over the SAVE Act. Stuart Adams lost his primary election and then raised a bunch of money the month after his defeat. Utah Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson dropped one of the best subtweets of the year. Representative Burgess Owens is warning about a socialist takeover of Utah, but this is just more of the same old warmed-over rhetoric we've come to expect from him. Plus, the continuing fight over the building of data centers in Utah, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey movie, and much more. Now, before we dive into the show, I've got a couple of quick favors to ask. If you're listening to this podcast, go ahead and hit subscribe wherever you get your shows. And if you've got some time, please leave a rating and review. That genuinely helps more people find this show. And if you want to support the actual journalism behind it, I'm an independent one-person operation. No corporate money, no billionaire backers, just readers and listeners like you. You can head over to my website, utahpolitics.news, sign up for the newsletter there. That's free. And if you want to do more than that, you can become a paying subscriber or toss a few bucks in the tip jar. Either one keeps this going, and thank you for your support. All right, let's get into the show. I don't know if you saw the news. You probably did, but over the weekend, the Salt Lake City airport recorded its highest overnight low temperature ever, which I think was 86 degrees. That's the hottest it's ever been overnight. Like I said, don't think of it as the hottest summer ever. Think of it as the coolest summer for the rest of your life. I think that's probably the best way to look at this. My name is Brian Schott. I'm the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. That's independent journalism that covers Utah politics. I've been a political journalist in Utah for more than 25 years, and my job is to help you understand what's happening in the news and why it's happening. As I said, I am an independent journalist. Utah Political Watch is me. It's a solo operation, and my journalism is not funded by corporations. It's not funded by billionaires. It's funded by my readers. And people who value what I do. So if you feel like supporting what I do, you can head over to my website, utahpolitics.news, and you can either become a paying subscriber or you can throw some money in the tip jar. All of that helps support this product. Glad to have you aboard tonight. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about Senator Mike Lee and his efforts to pass the SAVE Act, which frankly are pissing off Republicans in the Senate. I wrote a story yesterday. Stuart Adams lost his primary election, but he still reeled in almost $120,000 in political donations in the month after his election loss. We'll talk about what that could possibly be. MIDA is hitting pause on the Stratos data center, which explains, which is completely understandable, especially after the backlash took out one of the most prominent politicians here in the state. And Burgess Owens had a fairly hilarious post on social media warning about the scourge of socialism, rising socialism in our state. We've got a lot to get into. So let's start off by talking about Senator Mike Lee and his efforts to pass the Save America Act, which frankly are pissing off his colleagues in the Senate. What happened yesterday is Senator John Cornyn exploded on Senator Mike Lee in a meeting where he went after Mike Lee and said that Mike Lee's efforts, let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about why John Cornyn exploded. First thing, so Senator Mike Lee has been trying to pass the Save America Act, which he says is about election security. But as we've talked about before, it is a voter suppression bill. He says, we should require ID to vote in elections. But if the SAVE Act passes, the only ID that would be allowed, the only IDs that would be valid would either be your passport or your birth certificate. There are 5 states that have special IDs that would, special driver's licenses that would be allowed as acceptable ID to vote. But everywhere else, here in Utah especially, you could not use your driver's license to vote. You would have to use your passport or your birth certificate. And if you're a woman who got married and took your husband's name, or even if you're a man who got married and took your wife's name, and your name on your passport now doesn't match the name on your birth certificate, well, that's a problem. And now you have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops and try to get the paperwork that will allow you to vote. That's what the SAVE Act does. That's the main thing. It also cracks down on mail-in voting. But it's a voter suppression bill that was created by a lot of the election deniers who screamed about a stolen election in 2020. President Trump's baseless claims of election fraud in the 2020 election, which there were none. There's absolutely no proof to support that. So that's what the SAVE Act is. And Mike Lee has been relentlessly flogging this on social media. He's been fundraising off of it like crazy. And now his latest gambit, because what they're trying to do in Washington is they're trying to stick parts of it into the budget bill or the appropriations bill, and pass it through reconciliation to get past a Democratic filibuster. I don't think they'll be able to get the major provisions of it in, but the Senate is ready to go on break, on recess. And the reason they're going on recess right now in August, recess through August and September, is so senators who are up for election, a third of them, there are 34 on the ballot this year, they can go home and campaign, and then the rest of them can work in their district. The House is already in recess, but the Senate is getting ready to go on recess. And usually when they go on recess, they just make a motion and pass it by unanimous consent to go on recess. And the way it works on unanimous consent is if there is one dissenting vote, because it's not unanimous, then what happens is they have to take a roll call vote. And Senator Lee is threatening to object. He's threatening to object to the vote, to the unanimous consent, and he's going to force a roll call vote, or at least he's threatening to force a roll call vote. And what that will do is it puts his colleagues on the spot because they don't want to stay in Washington. He wants to stay in Washington and have a talking filibuster and keep people in Washington until they pass this thing. Spoiler alert, they don't have the votes. They do not have the votes to pass this. Even if he were able to get them to stay in Washington, it doesn't change the math on this bill. But so Senator Lee is planning on objecting to the unanimous consent to go on break. And that will force everybody to have to do a roll call vote. And then you can see which members of the Republican caucus didn't want to stay in Washington to vote on this voter suppression bill, the Save America Act, which is very important to President Donald Trump. And so Lee is trying to shame them. And yesterday in a meeting, John Cornyn basically exploded on Lee, just got after him. And John Cornyn is out the door next year. He lost his Senate primary to Ken Paxton. And there were some tweets about this who said a reporter, Andrew Desidero, who's with Punchbowl News, he tweeted yesterday, Senator Cornyn just went off on Senator Mike Lee for his vow to force a vote on recessing for August. Cornyn said Lee is, quote, demoralizing our base. Quote, I mean, what possible rationale could there be for that other than self-aggrandizement? And also, he also said that Collins, Husted, Sullivan, those senators who are vulnerable incumbents and they want to go home and campaign, they'll have to vote to stay in office, which takes them off the campaign trail. And so his colleagues in the Senate are not happy with him. And by demoralizing the base, what this does is it just makes them targets, that the Senate won't pass the president's, policy priorities. And so why would the base get excited about elections? So that's why Senator Lee is pissing off his Senate colleagues. Gabriel on YouTube says, I thought they couldn't put it in a budget bill since it's policy unrelated to budget. They're going to get some parts of it in the budget bill. They won't get the ID part, and they won't get the vote by mail stuff. That does not fit, which is the reason why Senator Lee wants to stay in Washington. Katie Did It on YouTube says, the way I understand it is first step for the SAVE bill is to purge the voter rolls, then re-registering cluster F begins. Exactly. Everybody will have to re-register to vote and show proof of citizenship. And like I said, the only acceptable forms to show your proof of citizenship are your passport or your ID. And if they don't match, your passport or your birth certificate, and if they don't match, then you have to go through a whole bunch of hoops to be able to vote. So that's how Senator Mike Lee is pissing off a lot of his colleagues in the Senate, which, there's been reporting about that for months now. A few months ago, Puck News reported that Senator Lee was pushing for a talking filibuster, the same thing he's doing right now, forcing people to stay on the floor and debate the bill until it passes, get a vote up or down. It's basically a marathon. I would love to see Chuck Grassley stay on the floor. 92-year-old, I think he's older than that. He's in his 90s. 90, perhaps he's 98. I would love to see Chuck Grassley stay on the floor of the Senate for hours on end. That's not going to happen. So he's upsetting a lot of his colleagues in the Senate by calling for this. And back, as Puck News reported, it was pissing off his colleagues then. They were really upset with him then, because, well, all he's doing is grandstanding. All he's doing is fundraising off of it, and he just does not have a plan to try and convince other senators to vote for this, or even manage a marathon filibuster on the floor, a talking filibuster. They just don't have the votes. They don't even have 50 votes to pass this thing, much less the 60 they would need to overcome and end a filibuster. And so, this is all grandstanding from Senator Lee. He knows it's not going to pass. But as we've talked before, this is probably just a way to ingratiate himself with President Trump. So, that was one bit of news we had this week. Now, USA Today reported today that the strategy from the Republican caucus in the Senate, they've distributed some talking points to their members who are getting questions about why they're not staying in Washington to pass the SAVE Act, why they're not staying in Washington like Senator Lee wants them to have this talking filibuster and pass the SAVE Act. And Zachary Shermley from USA Today got his hands on an internal strategy document that's being circulated among Republican senators. And it has the talking points about the SAVE Act. So these are their talking points. What they're supposed to say when their constituents say, why aren't you passing this thing? Because we need to have secure elections. And the talking points are, 1, America needs the Save America Act, but eliminating the filibuster is a way to win the battle and lose the war. That's the thing that President Trump is demanding they do, demanding that the Senate eliminate the filibuster and just pass whatever they want, get this thing through, get the budget through. But if the Republicans ever lose control of the Senate, then the Democrats will be able to wield that. And then if you want to talk about dysfunction and whiplash, whoever's in control of the Senate, they're just going to go back and forth with policy. So that's the first talking point they've given. The second one is, if we eliminate the filibuster, Democrats will make Puerto Rico and D.C. states. True, they would do that. They would simply need a majority vote, and they would stage a complete federal takeover of our elections. No, they wouldn't, because that's what the Republicans are trying to do. But anyway, and pack the Supreme Court, which, probably. The third talking point they have is, I want to pass the Save America Act just as much as the president, but we don't have the votes to pass it or eliminate the filibuster. They don't have the votes to pass this bill, and they don't have the votes to eliminate the filibuster. If staying in session will somehow change that outcome, then I'm all for it, but I don't think staying in session will make more votes appear. And that's the issue that Senator Mike Lee is having. He wants people to stay in Washington and vote, but it's not going to change any minds. It's not going to change the trajectory of this bill. This piece of legislation just does not have the support it needs to pass. And the only way for it to pass is if Republicans nuke the filibuster. And the other problem is it's almost August, and there's not enough time to put this in place. You want to talk about a disastrous election. There's just not enough time to put this thing not enough time to put this thing in effect. Trying to completely overhaul elections in just a couple of months' time, I don't see how that could be done, how you could get all the states on board, even if there was a federal mandate. And by the way, this is an unfunded federal mandate. The Congress is going to pay for it. States would have to come up with money. So the legislature here in Utah would have to come up with the funds to make this happen. And legislatures across the country, they would have to figure out how to pay for this. So Senator Mike Lee, he's grandstanding again on the Save America Act, but he just does not have the votes to make it happen. Kobili on YouTube says Grassley is a young 93. Okay. Yeah. It's just astonishing to me that our Senate is so old. I mean, it's crazy that it's this old. And, we still don't know what's going on with Mitch McConnell. We don't know if he's alive or not. Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear demanded that Mitch McConnell record a video or send out something to prove that he's alive other than those photos. And those photos are so weird, because how hard is it to just record a video on your phone? How hard is it to do that? And I think it's so sad that the bar in America right now is so low that, you would think that a minimum requirement for someone to serve in the Senate is that they're alive. And we don't know if Mitch McConnell's alive or not. He's been out of the Senate for 40 some odd days. And Andy Beshear said, prove to us that you're okay, because you're not doing any work on behalf of the state. You're missing votes. You're not doing any work on behalf of your constituents. So either prove to us that you are capable of doing that, or resign, which I think is a completely reasonable thing to ask. How hard is it to record a video? How hard is it to record a video of yourself? And he's been gone for 40 some odd days recovering from a fall. This is all very weird. Coral on TikTok says, sorry, not sorry, but anyone over 80, even in great health, nope, our bodies break down regardless. I'll acknowledge that everybody ages differently, but Mitch McConnell is, we need something. I think it's only fair, because, I don't think the founders intended for people to be governing into their 80s and 90s. Well, they didn't really expect people to live into their 80s and 90s, but I don't think they expected anyone to be governing at that time. Nick Kuntz on Instagram says, are there any voices at the state capitol pushing back publicly against Mike Lee's brown nosing? Funny that you should ask that, because I'm going to bring that up. Because Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson continues to clap back at Senator Mike Lee for his antics. And I don't know if you saw this, but this was yesterday. Her personal account on Threads, which I believe is just Deidre Henderson. It's just her name, all one word. Okay, so this is what Deidre Henderson posted yesterday. And she said, rewind 5 years. Quote, the senator argued that Congress is attempting to undermine state control over elections. This is a story about, if you remember when the Democrats took the majority in Congress, I believe in 2020, they were trying to pass the John Lewis Act, H.R. 2, which had a whole bunch of voting reforms. So she quoted this article from 5 years ago that says, the senator argued that Congress is attempting to undermine state control over elections. This takes all sorts of decisions that the federal government really has no business making, takes them away from the states, makes them right here in Washington, D.C. by Congress. Now that is a very high quality subtweet right there, where she's calling out Senator Mike Lee for calling out Senator Mike Lee for basically flip-flopping, because he argued strenuously against H.R. 2, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which ultimately did not pass. But he was against it. He is against federalizing of elections. But now magically, when a Republican is in the White House, he's all for the federalizing of elections, which just goes to show you that his claims to be a constitutional scholar are bullcrap. You know, and as we've said before, his version of the Constitution that he loves to trot around, it's basically the John Birch Society Constitution, which a little weird. His version is a little weird anyway. It comes from an organization that is affiliated with the John Birch Society. So, you know, I mean, it may make some people's hearts flutter when they see him whip out his pocket constitution, but his version is sort of an extremist version of the U.S. Constitution. Nick Kuntz on Instagram says, does this hurt her politically to clap back against Lee? I don't think so. I mean, she's not, I suspect she wants to run for governor in 2028. And as I've said before, I think that she's one of the front runners just by name ID alone. And I think she'll be able to get to raise some money for it as well. But you know, there's a segment of the Republican electorate that does not like Senator Lee, or has tired of his antics. And so she might be able to capture that. The question is, how big is that segment? And what is it going to look like in 2028? A lot can happen. A lot can happen between now and the November elections. We're not locked into anything. So, you know, what is it going to look like when we get all the way to 2028? But I don't think that hurts her politically. Michael Smalden on TikTok says, I'm sorry, but our lieutenant governor is the only one holding the line. Yeah, she is the only one. And what I would like to see, because she is getting a lot of criticism, a lot of vitriol from the Republican base, Senate her for not turning over the election records to the federal government, forcing the federal government to sue. A lot of people on social media who don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're very angry at her, and, you know, really criticizing her. And what has disappointed me is you have not seen Governor Cox standing up for his lieutenant governor. She doesn't need it. Okay. She does not need him to stand up, but it would be nice if he were to show some level of support for her, because she's been a punching bag of the legislature and of the Republican Party. He's a punching bag too, but he's tried to get back into the good graces by endorsing Donald Trump and pretty much going MAGA. She's not. She hasn't. And I don't think she will. But it would be nice to see Cox, you know, show at least a little bit of support for her. I don't think he will. But, you know, it would be nice, but that would require a little bit of backbone. I'd like to see that. You kind of wish it would happen. In a normal world, it would happen. Now, I wrote a story yesterday, and this is something that I noticed a while ago. And And I went back and looked at it a couple of days ago as well. And the last campaign finance report we got from candidates here in Utah, if you're not up for election, you only have to report one time a year. But everyone who is up for election this year, they had to file a campaign finance report 1 week ahead of the primary, the June primary. So the last campaign finance report, I think, went through June 16th, or that's when it was filed. That was the last look we got. But there's another provision in Utah law that says you have to disclose any campaign donation within 30 days. So those do show up on their campaign finance forms. And so I went and looked at Senator Adams, and I noticed a few days ago, I noticed right after the election on July 1st, he got a $25,000 check from Building Construction Partners. That's a company that owns Flagship Homes. And he got another big check from someone. And then on July 21st, just last week, he got a bunch of money. He got $25,000 checks from John Miller, who is the founder and chairman of Dakota Pacific Real Estate. He got $25,000 from David Layton, who's the CEO and president of Layton Construction. He got $2,500 from a company in Florida called Gridliance West, and they've pushed this project called the High West Transmission Project. Essentially, they want to build a big electrical cable, a high voltage power line across Utah and Nevada that will hook into the California power grid and allow power producers here in Utah to sell their excess power to California. Adams got $2,500. He also got $25,000 from Gershon Barnett. He's a big person in MIDA. He runs Extel Development. They're the ones who are building the luxury hotel, the Grand Hyatt Deer Valley. That's part of the MIDA projects. That's his project. He wrote a $25,000 check for Adams' campaign, and a Dallas-based company called Dart Industries, they gave $10,000. Just last year, they bought a plot in the Deer Valley development from Extel. Then they're going to build an Evermore resort. They already have some of those in Florida. They want to build one here. And this is a prime spot that they bought. It's called Lot 13, and it's like really close to the ski lift base. And they want to build a resort there. So these people all gave a bunch of money to Stuart Adams. In fact, after his election, after he lost his election, and he lost pretty handily too, but after he lost his election, he reeled in $117,600 in donations. He also transferred another $55,000 from his leadership PAC into his campaign. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this might happen. He reported having about $119,000 in his campaign account, according to the last disclosure. The next one we're going to get, I think, is September 30th. But according to the last disclosure, he had $119,000 in his account. And we're not going to know what he's spending this money on until September 30th. But the fact that he transferred money from his PAC into his campaign and he's getting all these big campaign donations, I've heard some people in the know have estimated that he may have spent somewhere around $400,000 on his losing primary campaign. I don't have exact figures. We won't know that until September, but people who are pretty plugged into what Stuart Adams is doing are talking about the fact that he it maybe spent that much money on his campaign. Perhaps not. Again, don't take that for certain. I don't have any figures to back that up, and we won't know anything until the September 30th reports come out. So what this is telling me is he had to pay his bills. He had to pay his campaign bills. That's what he had to do. And that's why we're seeing all of this money flow into his campaign here at the even though he ended up losing. Now, there's a possibility that, or one of the things that could have happened when he, the other thing is that, he plans to continue building his influence, in the state Senate. Being the, sort of like a shadow president and still exerting his influence over the process, because, he's not going to completely go away. And one of the ways they do that is by donating money to candidates or to political action committees. Some people have been speculating he might be thinking about running for governor. Good luck on that. But yeah, he raised a whole bunch of money, and it's more money than any other senator who was up for election either in November or in the June primary raised after the election. Like, he pulled in a bunch of money. Katie did it on YouTube asked, are there restrictions on Adams spending the donations since he isn't in office or running for office? There are some restrictions, not a lot. He can't use it for like personal expenses. He can't keep it. He can't buy a car. There are a lot of people making jokes online saying, oh, he's just going to put in a pool at his house or buy a car. He can't do that. But, he can use it for travel expenses. He can use it to, stuff for his senatorial office. He uses all his campaign before this year. He uses campaign money for a lot of travel. He pays for a lot of travel. I noted that in his disclosures that we got right before the primary, he had paid like $3,000 for a really for a meal at a really high end steakhouse in New York City. So he travels around a lot and uses his campaign his campaign account and his PAC to pay for that. So he can use the money for that. He can give it to other candidates. He can't give it to a federal candidate. That's not allowed. State money cannot flow to a federal account. So he can't do that, but he could give it to people who are running for governor, people who are running for Senate. We've got the senatorial leadership elections. Who's going to be his successor in the Senate? And that's one thing to pay attention to. Who's donating money to these candidates and how much? And I'm sure that Adams has his thoughts on who he would like to see replace him in the Senate. And I'm sure that he's going to use this money to help support that as well. That's what happened when Greg Hughes became the Speaker of the House the first time. And Hughes, I forget who he's running against. He might have been running against Representative Dew, but, what he did was he gave a lot of money to the, freshman candidates this year. One of them, the year he became Speaker, one of them was Mike Schultz. And so he gave a lot of money to these candidates who were coming in to the legislature, help fund their campaigns. And that paid off for him because they voted for him to become the Speaker of the House. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why Mike Schultz was on the Rules Committee as a freshman lawmaker, which was almost unheard of at the time. So, that's Mida19 on TikTok says Mike Schultz is a billionaire. I don't think he's that wealthy. I think he's got a lot of money. I mean, he does own a private jet. And he flies a lot of places on his private jet. Whenever you see members of the House going to Washington D.C. for something, they usually use his private jet. And I've told this story before. One of my favorite stories is during the COVID pandemic, right after the restrictions had been lifted, the legislature usually goes to the NCSL conference, National Conference of State Legislatures. And that year it was in Georgia. So I think this was in Florida. I think it was 2021. It was in Florida. And what happened was there was a huge, internal squabble over which members of the Republican caucus got to ride down to Florida in Schultz's jet. And then everyone who did travel in Schultz's jet ended up getting COVID, which is kind of funny. Mida19 says, I would like a $3,000 steak dinner. Me too. Actually, I don't know. That's too much money to spend on food. It's way too much money to spend on food. I think the most expensive meal I've ever had in my life I was out in California in the Napa Valley, visiting my brother, and his daughter, one of my nieces, actually was a pastry chef at a very high-end restaurant in Napa Valley. I can't remember the name of it. And her fiance at the time was I think the sous chef in the restaurant. So we went in. I mean, this is a really fancy place, not the kind of place I would normally go, but we went in and they just kept bringing stuff out. The food was so good. But I think, and this was for myself, my wife, and my two kids, because we split the bill. And I think we ended up paying like $800 as half of the bill. I think that's the most expensive meal I've ever had. Never again, but, it was kind of worth it. Chapman Waters on YouTube asks, what do you think about the legislature's decisions regarding higher education in Utah, budget cuts and restructuring? I know people are losing their jobs, consulting firms involved. I don't really have an opinion about this, but I do know that this is part of their crackdown on higher education. I always found it ironic that the person who was leading this sort of jihad against higher education, this push to restructure higher education, Speaker Schultz, never went to college himself. And I think that's one of the problems we have here in America, is that we really tend to equate wealth with intelligence. And if you just look at what's going on with Elon Musk, that is not the case. Elon Musk, he's a wealthy man, but he's not a very smart man. He thinks he's smart. His followers think he's smart, but he's not smart. And I think that's one of the problems we have, is we tend to equate wealth with intelligence, which is the complete wrong way to look at that. So, Mida 19 says Schultz equals wealthy and no college. Yeah, he made a bunch of money off of his real estate development. And one of the clues that we got, or at least one of the clues we got that I thought was about, or at least one of the clues that I saw, that Schultz was getting ready to run for governor. He is going to run for governor in 2028, unless something really big happens. But he's got plans to run for governor in 2028. And the first time, I'd heard some rumors about that, but the first time it sort of dawned on me that that's what was going to happen is on his financial disclosures. You can look up and see what businesses that the members of the legislature own. They have to file these conflict of interest forms showing whichever businesses, how much they make money. And his career or his occupation switched from real estate developer to rancher. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, he's going to run for governor. That was the first indication that the rumors that I'd heard were probably true, that he switched his occupation from real estate developer to governor. Nick Kuhn says, if and when a Democrat from Utah gets elected to the House, do you think anything happens to reverse the book bannings in that district? Nope. That's a state level thing. The legislature passed that law and they made it so it's really easy for parents to go to these smaller schools. Basically, parents have to file objections in a certain number of schools. And the way that they set that up is so that if you have parents in some like charter schools who object to a certain book, and then the charter school boards vote to take the book off the shelves. And then if you get to a certain number of charter schools who do that, then it goes up to the State Board of Education, and they either get to rescind the book ban or let it go into effect statewide. So you let a very small number of parents, a very small number of parents, decide for the whole state what books are available in libraries. And that's the system that they designed up at the legislature. They did that intentionally, so it'd be very easy for far-right activists to get books pulled from library shelves. They made it very easy. It's intentionally that way. Kobili on YouTube says, do you think John Curtis will run for governor? I don't see why he wouldn't. We've talked about this in the past. I don't see why he wouldn't. He's not up for election until 2030. So even if he loses, he still goes back to the Senate. It's a free run for him. He will have all the money he needs to run. There's a billionaire out of North Carolina who helped fund his senatorial campaign in 2024, who will probably pour a bunch of money into the state if John Curtis decides to run, and I'm pretty sure he will. You don't see those trial balloons unless he's going to do it. That walk across the state, that was a campaign stunt to decide whether he's going to run for governor. If he doesn't run, I will be shocked. And I think that the moment he gets into the race, he is the front runner simply because of name ID. Name ID and money are the two biggest factors that you can have. It doesn't matter if the delegates love you. If you don't have enough money, if you don't have money and you have name ID and nobody knows who the hell you are, then you're in a lot of trouble. That was Brad Wilson's problem when he ran for Senate against John Curtis in 2024. He thought his money, his own personal wealth, was going to scare people off, and it didn't. It didn't scare anybody off. You had several people get in the race, and Trent Staggs, beloved by the delegates, he finished second, but he didn't have a chance. The moment John Curtis got in that race, he was the front runner, and everybody knew it. In fact, Brad Wilson knew it. That's why Brad Wilson and his allies tried so hard to convince Curtis to not get in that race. But he did. So, Imageworthy on Instagram says money needs to be removed from politics, period. I agree with you. But you're going to have to get lawmakers to vote to unilaterally disarm. Utah's campaign finance laws are some of the laxest in the country. I mean, we have very little there's almost no restrictions on who can give money to you. In fact, I don't think there are any restrictions. And there's no restrictions on how much they can give you. You routinely see $50,000 checks going into Spencer Cox's campaign account. And, $25,000 going in. A bunch of people wrote $25,000 checks to Stuart Adams. And then there's and our reporting requirements are minimal. I think it's ridiculous that people who aren't running for office only have to disclose once a year. Utah Grid asks, what are some of the interesting things you are seeing with the November elections now that the primaries are over? I'm going to be interested to see how long the legs are of this data center issue, because this is a big issue. This is a really big issue. And it got everybody's attention when Stuart Adams was taken out. And he can blame dark money all he wants. We talked about that last week. He can blame dark money all he wants. He can blame misinformation. But it was this Stratos data center. That was the number one issue why he got knocked out. The controversy surrounding his step-granddaughter being accused of rape, and then him changing the law that helped her get a plea deal, that didn't help him either. But I think the biggest thing, the thing that galvanized the voters against him, was the data center, the Box Elder County data center, and the way that it was approved, the way that it was just pushed through with very little public input by this unelected state board, unaccountable state board that nobody really paid attention to. And then all of a sudden, they're pushing this gigantic data center in Box Elder County. So, I'm wondering how, if voter anger over that is going to persist. That's one of the biggest things that I will be watching. Voters are not, voters aren't motivated about, the overturning or about, Prop 4 and the new congressional map. That's not a vote. That's not a motivating factor for voters. We saw that in Carrie Ann Lisenby's race. She tried to make that the central issue against Blake Moore, and Republicans yawned because he stomped her. So that's the reason why the legislature is not putting a constitutional amendment on this year's ballot that will allow them to repeal any citizen passed ballot initiative. That's how they make this work. And so, they kind of got the message. Bon Nanny on Instagram says data centers all over are getting pushed through. The American economy is basically being propped up by data centers right now. That's the biggest thing that's driving the economy right now. And they're trying to push these data centers through very, very quickly. because they're seeing the backlash. Americans don't like them. They don't want them in their backyards, and they don't like the process that's leading to these data centers. There's another proposed data center in Tooele County near the shores of the Great Salt Lake. And they had 100 people show up for a hearing last night, people objecting to their plan to pump like 250,000 gallons of polluted water into the Great Salt Lake every day because of the data center. So, this is still a potent issue. How potent it will be when we get to November, I don't know. But that's basically the main thing that I am watching for in November. I'm sure there will be a number of other issues that come up. Affordability is going to be a big one, and I think that voters are starting to get fed up. They can't pay for anything. Nobody can afford anything, and the squeeze it's getting harder and harder. They're squeezing people for more and more. Katie Did It on YouTube says, would you know if historically members of the Utah legislature have drawn from higher income men rather than the working class? I think that that's true because it's a part-time job. You have to be able to essentially take 2 months off at the first of the year. I interviewed John Arthur, Representative John Arthur. He's a school teacher. He has to take leave from his classroom to serve in the legislature. He has to use his leave. He has to get a substitute lined up who's there for several weeks, and he's not in the classroom. So it's not the kind of job that is conducive to people who have a regular 9-to-5 job. It's really hard for them to do it. So I would say that it's much easier if you are a wealthy, upper middle class, you own your own business, you are in a white-collar profession. It's much easier to do that than it is for blue-collar and middle class. That's just the way it works. That's the way it's set up. We're a part-time legislature, and they're paid like $16,000 for the year. And I don't think that's, it's very hard to take leave from your job to do this other job. I saw a stat the other day. There's like 4,000 data centers in the United States. And one thing I think everyone is saying the AI bubble is coming, right? Everybody's really worried about because when the AI bubble pops, I think the economy is going to be in a world of hurt. But I think that we've already seen the AI bubble pop because when Google reported their earnings for this last quarter, they actually lost money on AI. And they're putting a whole bunch of resources into AI, and they lost money. Google, which has turned a profit every quarter, a massive profit every quarter, I think they lost something like $1 trillion on AI. It's just not sustainable. They aren't making products that people want. They're just slapping stuff in AI because, everybody needs AI. I don't need AI in my refrigerator. I don't need it in my washer and dryer. So Google lost some money. And that has to alarm some people. And then you got Elon Musk with his SpaceX pump and dump. It's actually trading lower than it was at its start. He's lost something like $500-600 billion worth of wealth. Couldn't happen to a better guy. But the problem is that's pretty much the only growth sector in our economy right now. People aren't spending. We're not seeing a lot of consumer goods being bought because it's freaking expensive to live. I don't know if you saw what they did in New York this week, but Mayor Mamdani announced that the city has 5 city-owned grocery stores that they're putting in food deserts in areas where, people don't have access, sort of thing. And they're taking a number of staple products, meat, vegetables, fruit, milk, cheese, staples, and they're going to price them at 30% below retail. And it's not 1 week at a time. You know how grocery stores have like something on sale for 1 week and then the next week? They're not going to do that. It's a whole month. So at the beginning of the month, they're going to say, this is what this stuff is going to cost. And then that's it. And I think that, agree with this politics, don't agree with this politics. I think the things that's kind of refreshing about Mayor Mamdani is he promised to do something when he was elected, and he's doing it. And he's showing that it can get done. And, I think that this is a good thing for lower income people. People have trouble feeding themselves. And if people want to, save some money, I think this is a great place to start helping people. Mida 19 says food deserts are lower income neighborhoods. Yep. Exactly. Let's see. I know we saw, I want to talk about this briefly since we're talking about data centers. Mida has has basically put the brakes on the Stratos data center for now. Let's see. I'm reading this story from the Utah News Dispatch, written by Annie Knox. Mida has paused the data center in Box Elder County because of the backlash. You think? People are really, really mad. I mean, there's court cases and people are trying to still block it. So I think Mida's wise to not move forward on this because I think they understand the public perception. Nom on TikTok says, I literally don't trust anything they say. They're just waiting for everyone to forget and then they quietly try it again. The problem is I think more people are paying attention to what they're doing. Mida is a really interesting onion to peel back, like the layers there and the things that they are doing that are far beyond their initial charge. It is fascinating, but they are, I've been trying to dig into that for years. Utah Grit says, I don't think they could get financing for Stratos. I also think they need to wait until after the election. I agree with that. Also, one thing to watch is I don't think they have a client lined up. I don't think they have one of the big companies. I mean, who's buying this data for this data center? It felt like this was just a haphazard, or if you want to be a little more blunt, a half-ass attempt to try to get in on the data center thing, which is something that Stuart Adams has a track record of trying to do, trying to get in on the next big thing, trying to help Utah with the next big thing. And I think he saw data centers doing it. This is not analogous, but he's tried this before. I remember he spent years trying to crack down on social media. Eventually, states are doing it now. Utah's doing it, and they're right. I think that it's really good that we're cracking down on social media for teenagers. If I had to do it again, I probably would not have let my kids on social media as early as I did. I think that's a big mistake I made. I think that's causing a lot of the literacy crisis in America. People can't read. People don't read. They don't, they get their news from podcasts, which is terrible. So I think that that's contributed to a lot of this. So I think that Utah's right on that. Now, some of the things that Adams wanted to do, I don't think were possible, but that's what he was trying to do. But I don't think that they have a client, a customer for this data center. Who's going to use it? I don't think they have it set up. And it's on hold right now, which I think is wise. Burgess Owens today posted a very lengthy op-ed to social media today, in which he is warning that the scourge of socialism and communism is coming to Utah, and they people ousted some rock solid conservatives in the primaries, and that's going to push Utah left. Burgess Owens cannot say a sentence. A sentence for Burgess Owens is a noun, a verb, and either Marxism, socialism, or woke. That's it. You watch his campaign or his television appearances, which aren't coming anymore because he's not going to be in Congress, so he's not in demand anymore. And this is just him. This is just sour grapes from him because he got pushed out when the new congressional maps. But I thought it was laughable that he was, he points to Stuart Adams' loss as one of the reasons why. By association, he's insinuating that Stephanie Hollis, who describes herself as a traditional Republican, is somehow going to move the state left. I don't, first of all, respectfully, Representative Owens, define socialism, please. Define Marxism. I want to hear your definition of that before we go any further on this conversation, because I don't think you know what those things are. I get the impression that they're just talking points. So define those for me, because I don't think that one of Stephanie Hollis' goals is to seize the means of production. I could be wrong, but that's not the impression that I get from her. That she's not going to seize that she's got these grand designs to seize the means of production through socialism, which is what socialism is. Also, we don't need to listen to someone who basically plagiarized large portions of his book from Wikipedia and other sources. Yeah, that happened. When he was running for Congress, he wrote a book. He's written a couple of books, but one of his books, and this was some great reporting by Media Matters for America, and he plagiarized. It's pretty black and white. Just plagiarized large portions of his book. That thing about weenies, wimps, and whatever it is about, how liberal men are not manly enough. Gabriel on YouTube says, I've got a definition for you. Socialism is things I don't like. Exactly. This is an interesting comment from Gamer Jame on Twitch. He says, I'll never own a house. That is the biggest problem of our lifetime right now. The biggest problem of our lifetime is that the younger generation, they're not able to afford to live in this world. They don't own houses. And that is going to be a pressure point. I think people understand that, but the system is not it's not built to incentivize that anymore. And people can't live the lives that their parents did. They're not living a better life their parents did. I think this is one of the first generations where their life is going to be, their quality of life living is going to be less than what their parents were, what was for previous generations. And that worries me. That is extremely worrisome, because that's where you get a lot of disaffected young people. And that gives rise to different political ideologies. I'm not saying that, this is not me being alarmist. This is me being very concerned that we have an economy that only works for a few people. It doesn't work for everybody. And, that's why I'm seeing, that's why I'm extremely interested in watching what Mayor Mamdani is doing in New York, because he's trying to make government work for everybody, not just the wealthy. And the wealthy don't like it, but he's doing what he said he would do, which is a breath of fresh air, because you don't see politicians actually following through on their, you don't see people following through. You don't see politicians following through on their campaign promises. Hystera Tale on Instagram. Trevor Lee is truly a mommy blogger now, bitching about a poem he can't read and a movie he didn't see. Yeah, Trevor Lee he's joining the chorus of people who are not fans of the Odyssey. I love that movie. I thought it was really good. I'm not going to say any spoilers, but I thought it was really interesting that the script changed the point of the poem, changed the point of the whole story. What happened at the end changed everything about that. And I thought that was such an interesting choice. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But it really did change the entire point of the Odyssey. And people who are complaining about the dialogue, one of the things that people don't understand about Christopher Nolan, yes, he's a great filmmaker. He's an incredible filmmaker, but he's also an incredible writer. And there was a piece of dialogue where, they're going past the sirens, and Odysseus lashes himself to the mast of the ship while he has his men plug their ears with wax so they don't hear the siren song. But he wanted to hear it, so he lashed himself to the mast of the ship. and as they and you can just see the agony in his face. And they asked him afterwards, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact phrase, but they asked him afterwards what the Song of the Sirens was like. And he said, it was everything you ever wanted, and then realizing the thing that you wanted the most, you already had and can't have again. And I thought that was a beautiful piece of dialogue. So if anybody says that Christopher Nolan can't write, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Matt Damon, Oscar incoming. I think this is going to win everything. It's going to win everything. It's just so good. I'm excited to see Spider-Man Brand New Day this weekend. I don't usually go to a lot of films, but there's some that I'm making exceptions for to go see in the theaters. I did not see Spider-Man No Way Home in the theaters during the COVID pandemic, and I didn't want to do that. My wife was also going through chemotherapy, so we didn't want to go out into public and expose ourselves to germs. So, but I do regret not seeing that in the movie theaters. So I'm excited to see it over the weekend. Talking more about Zoran Mamdani. Zoran turned down a pay raise in New York City. Our mayor in Salt Lake City took a massive pay raise a few years ago. Wish our mayor was like New York City's mayor. The legislature is also getting a pay raise because there's a commission that sets the pay rate for the executive branch and the legislative branch. And they're getting a pay raise. I forget exactly what it's going to be. It's a moderate pay raise, but its pay is going up, and it goes into effect automatically unless they actively vote it down. That's the way they set it. So they have to actively vote down a pay raise. They don't have to vote on giving themselves a pay raise. They changed that a few years ago because they didn't like the look. And they didn't like the backlash they were getting from people when they voted to give themselves a pay raise. So they just made it so it just automatically goes into effect. Whatever this commission says, if this commission says that there needs to be a pay raise, then it automatically goes into effect unless they actively vote it down. There was a Reddit post on the Salt Lake City subreddit, probably got posted in a few other places, but this made me laugh. And it was initially shared in the climate subreddit and the best of subreddit. And it basically is mocking Governor Cox for his calls for, people to pray for rain in the middle of our drought. And it's essentially a version of an old joke, but I thought it was apt. I thought it was really well done. So I'm going to share this with you. It says, a governor prayed for rain. God sent him scientists who laid out the snowpack numbers a decade in advance and said, build the reservoirs, thin the forests, plan for the dry years. The governor thanked them and waited for God. God sent him engineers who drew up the water systems and the burn crews and the drought contingencies. The governor cut their budgets and waited for God. God sent him a historically dry winter as a warning, mountains bare where snow should be, so there was still time to act. The governor proclaimed a day of prayer and waited for God. The fields burned, the rivers ran low, the fires came, and when it was over, the governor lifted his hands and asked, Lord, why did you not send help? And God said, I sent you the data, the engineers, and the warning. Prayer was never the most powerful tool I gave you. It was the one you reached for so you wouldn't have to pick the others. And that's politics in a nutshell. Politicians avoid making the tough choices for as long as they can until their hands are forced. It takes political courage to make these tough choices. I know you saw this morning that the head of the Department of Agriculture, actually the head of the Department of Natural Resources, Joel Ferry, stepped down today. He got a new opportunity in government relations, meaning he's going to become what? A lobbyist. That's what government relations are. So he's leaving his job after a couple of years on the job. Let's see. Gabriel on YouTube says, funny, the Judicial Compensation Commission is set up exactly the opposite way, where the judges have to vote, or the legislature has to vote to give the judges a pay raise. Exactly. I don't know if you saw there was a judge who resigned. I'm forgetting his name, but it was a report this morning. A judge resigned, saying that they don't have enough resources and the caseloads are unreasonable. And so, when the legislature this year was talking about, overhauling the judiciary, and they were gung-ho on adding 2 more seats to the Supreme Court because they were citing a heavy caseload, even though that's not really the case. If you look at the numbers, the Supreme Court has actually decided more cases over the past few years than they have previously. But the judiciary was saying, we need those resources. If you're going to add judges, add them down in the district courts, because we need help. We don't have enough people. But they didn't listen to that. They added 2 seats to the Supreme Court and created this new constitutional court. But a judge resigned, and that's worrisome. That a judge who, probably a career defining move for them to become a judge, then all of a sudden resigned, and they said, I can't do this because I don't have enough support, and the caseload is just insane. And so the legislature, because the Supreme Court told them no twice, they were all gung-ho on rigging the system in their favor rather than paying attention to where more resources were actually needed. I remember when Joel Ferry was first appointed. I think that Governor Cox violated the Constitution when he first appointed Joel Ferry, because he appointed Joel Ferry to be the head of DNR, but Ferry did not get a confirmation hearing. In fact, his nomination was not submitted to the legislature for several months. And but the Constitution and the law says when someone is going to take over the job, if someone is appointed to the job, they have to be confirmed by the Senate. The governor has to send a letter. I think he has 30 days to do it. And that's not what happened in this case. And the reason why is because they were already past the point. It was an election year. It was 2022. They were already after the point where they could have replaced Ferry on the ballot. I think he was in HD 2 or 3, and up in northern Utah. Perhaps it was HD 1. He was in the legislature, and they couldn't replace him on the ballot, so they needed him to stay in the legislature. He was doing the job for several months without being confirmed, which violates the state constitution. So, the Constitution is very convenient. You have to listen to it when it's convenient for you. But that's what happened when Ferry was first appointed. So we'll see how long it takes Cox to send over an appointment letter to the Senate so they can get public comment, because they have to give 30 days for public comment, and then they hold a confirmation hearing. I think they've already scheduled the confirmation hearing for his replacement, or at least scheduled the hearing time. They haven't put out their release asking for comment yet, but that's the process. And that's not what happened when Governor Cox appointed Joel Ferry to be the head of DNR, because he was serving in the legislature, but they didn't have anybody to replace him on the ballot. The Republican Party could not replace him on the ballot for the legislature. And the Democrats actually went to the Supreme Court trying to get him off of trying to force him off the ballot. Supreme Court didn't do it. But they made a pretty compelling case about that. Tom DeSarin says the same thing. HD1, Utah Dems sued to get his replacement struck from the ballot and was unsuccessful. And Ferry stood for re-election, even though he knew that he was going to resign. So he was on the ballot in HD1, and he was working as the head of the Department of Natural Resources, but he was on the ballot running for re-election, but everybody knew if he won, and he was going to win because it's a heavily Republican district, he would resign, which, that seems a little dishonest, because then the delegates would get to pick his replacement, not the voters. Same thing happened when Kara Birkeland resigned. She just won re-election, And then like a month later, she resigned to take a job with a national group, allowing the delegates, even though she had just been reelected, the delegates got to pick her replacement, which turned out to be Representative Tiara Oxier. Let's see. Nam on TikTok says, I attended those hearings and the legislatures were so dismissive for all of them. A lot of them are very, a lot of these, once the nomination is made, it's very hard. It's very rare that they will vote against. I think the last nominee that the Senate voted against was, Salt Lake County Councilwoman Suzanne Harrison. She was in the legislature. She was being appointed. She was in the legislature and then won a seat on the county council when she was redistricted out of her seat. She won her seat in the county council, and she was appointed to fill a local government slot on the air quality board. Like, this is just a board. She'd been nominated to fill, there's certain seats that have to go to certain people. And so this was like a local government spot, and she was nominated to fill that spot, on the air quality board. And the Senate Environment Confirmation Committee rejected her nomination. And I can't remember the last time that happened. I think the last time it happened, they did reject a couple of female judges early in the 2000s, during the Herbert administration. He nominated a couple of women to be judges, and they rejected those nominations, which got them a lot of bad press for, confirming all the men, but rejecting the female judges. But it's very rare when one of these nominations is rejected. Harrison was rejected because, one, she didn't play nice with the Republicans when she was up on the Hill. She was a critic of theirs. And two, she knows what she's talking about. She's a medical professional. She's an anesthesiologist. And, she's got some qualifications, and she would not have rubber stamped some of the things that the Air Quality Board would do. So, and it was a seat that I think had been empty for quite a while. And then they eventually ended up replacing her. I think Tom, you're right. I think it was someone in the Tooele area who took her spot on that commission. But it's very rare for them to reject any of these appointments. A couple of things I want to ask you to do. Follow me on whatever app you're watching. Okay, that's the first thing that's easy to do. Just give me a follow on Facebook, Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Just drop a follow wherever you're watching this. The second thing to do is to go over to my website, utahpolitics.news, sign up for my newsletter. That's free. Okay, sign up for my newsletter. You'll get all of my journalism in your inbox. Whenever I publish a new story, you'll get an email. When we have a live stream, you'll get an email. That's free to do. If you want to support what I do as an independent journalist, that means I don't have any corporate backers. There's no corporate money. There's no advertising money funding what I do. It's all reader funded. It's all audience funded. People who appreciate what I do. They're the ones who fund this. If you want to make more of this possible, a couple of things you can do when you get over to my website. One, you can become a paying subscriber. $55 a year. It's $5 a month, $55 a year. You get a few subscriber-only newsletters. You get access to a few other things. That's the first thing. Or if you don't want to do a subscription, and I get it, I understand that. If you have some extra cash lying around, you can throw a couple bucks in the tip jar. All of that goes to this product. Just funds what I do, allows me to do this, to do more of these live streams, podcasts, reporting, digging into things, because it takes time and resources, and this is my full-time job. And I'm so thankful I get to do it. And I'm so thankful that there are readers and listeners who appreciate what I do. So, follow me, go to my website, utahpolitics.news, sign up for my newsletter. And if you want to support it, throw a couple bucks in the tip jar or do a subscription. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great evening, and we will talk to you again real soon.